Many thanks for making time to speak to us, Mr. Makwetu. Just walk us through the amendment to the Act as it was. If someone is very pedestrian and is very oblivious to how it stood before, what additions could you actually point out for them?
No, thanks very much, Arnold, for having us. Firstly, the way our Act is structured prior to the amendments is such that we are required to audit and to report. To report to the people in the institution who are running the institution, both the accounting officer as well as those that exercise oversight over the institution. So we kind of leave it to their good officers to do the right thing with the findings that we have made. That's been like that for up to now. And our evidence of the last 20 years indicates that despite all that trust, nothing has changed. Nothing has gotten better. And they, in most instances, not even address those weaknesses that we find. Now, the new Act that has been amended allows us to elevate the issue of what is called a material irregularity in the financial statements, which requires us to identify those matters, hand them over to a public body for further investigation.
But Mr. Makwetu, the NPA kind of has a backlog already of many of these cases. Wouldn't one argue that this is actually a drop in the ocean?
Well, we're not really pursuing the same issues as the NPA is pursuing. What will end up in our case is a situation where an accounting officer will be often reminded about their own responsibilities. And in the event that they don't carry out their responsibilities, there are certain remedial actions that the audit office is now empowered to issue. And if those remedial actions are not adhered to at the prescribed time, then the audit office will also be empowered to impose a certificate of debt. In essence, what it means is that if you are an accounting officer and you've had those type of material irregularities that have been identified in an audit and you don't act on them, you might be required to make good that which has been lost by the system. That's a fundamental change. So it's not really a case of we all trying to get to court. Some might, if they contest them, but the reality is that when you get examined by an auditor, you're now going to know upfront that the outcomes of that audit, if they are negative, and if they are serious, and they are irregularities, there will also be an option for the audit office to impose a certificate of debt on you.
Mr. Makwetu, I want to take this to a hypothetical kind of arrangement. If this amendment stood before the VBS saga, how would you see this play out?
Well, remember in the VBS matter, the audit office would have identified those matters, for example, in the audit. And if you remember, some of them happened in 2016, some of them most recently in the last year. So what would have happened is you would have identified those matters, flagged them as irregular transactions, and insist that within a prescribed period, the accounting officer, who is the highest level of accountability in that bank, would have been instructed through an amendment of the Act to carry out certain specific activities to correct that situation. And if they don't correct it, they will be called upon to make good if there was a significant financial loss incurred, for example.
Right. Mr. Makwetu, one thing that actually sticks out is this was actually reported by a certain publication, and they said this Act means it is not okay for a CA to just resign and get away with murder. And that was one of the issues that was raised. People just waking up, running away with millions of rands, and then they resign and everything is absolved. With this Act, it's all in the past. It cannot happen going forward. Is this a way to actually sum this up going forward?
No, definitely. I mean, if you have been caught in the audit and you were at that time when the remedial action was issued, while you were the accounting officer, if you resign tomorrow and the issue has already been identified and you are closely associated with it, it will follow you wherever you go, in essence. It doesn't matter if you move to another job 6 months later, the process that will be triggered to follow up on that remedial action will attach to the person who was identified who was in office at the time. So running away will probably be the physical thing, but the substance of it will still attach to you.
Let's move on. You definitely made headlines last year when you dropped KPMG. Of course, that's a story for another day. But looking forward, will there be a time in the near term where KPMG will be in the good books with the Auditor General's office?
Remember, the decision that we took at the time was based on our analysis and assessment of how their orientation at the time was exposing us to risk, because they were doing work on our behalf, like other firms do. But going into the future, I guess it will be determined by the evidence on the table, as well as what our requirements are, because remember, an audit office can only survive if it can demonstrate a level of independence, it can demonstrate a level of competence that is not tainted. If you've got those two things in place and there's no trouble about how it will affect us as an audit institution, then we can have a conversation to assess where you are now.
Right, Mr. Makwetu, let's just move on to another elephant in the room, which happens to be the municipalities. Now, through a report of yours from the Auditor General's office, it did highlight that this is last year, 2018, only 33 of South Africa's 257 councils had a clean bill of health. And this is staggering findings. Just give me a sense of, first of all, the prescriptions from your end, the way forward, because let's face it, the government is just not functioning. And the other is, what happens now? Does anyone actually take your recommendations seriously if you do actually highlight such key findings?
Well, I mean, Arnold, historically, many of these municipalities have not taken those recommendations seriously. They just ignored them, you know? And hence we fast-tracked the amendment to our Act so that we raise the risk of ignoring them. That's effectively what this amendment is also going to do. So if you are an accounting officer of a municipality and historically you've gone out and employed someone who is a chief financial officer, but upon interrogation we discover that this person doesn't have the minimum competences required for the job, you as an accounting officer, which is the municipal manager of the municipality, you'll be at high risk of having to face the consequences of the amended Act if you live with that reality. Because the Act prescribes that you as an accounting officer, this is now the Municipal Finance Management Act.
Yes.
It prescribes certain responsibilities on you, including making sure that you put in place a system of internal financial control in the environment. Now, the things that we pick up, like irregular expenditure, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, they happen in most instances when those internal financial controls are undermined. So we're going to take the responsibility where it belongs, and which is under the supervision and guidance of an accounting officer, and that's what will follow that institution.
Lots to actually highlight. If we're to talk about the irregular expenditures, like you've highlighted, Rand Water disclosed 117 million irregular expenditure incurred. No action taken over the water boards. Rand Water again, 455 million irregular expenditure. Do you get the sense that this is actually contempt of the Auditor General's office?
Not really.
Some of these people do not disclose some of this expenditure.
Look, the Auditor General comes in as an inspection mechanism. The law that governs financial management in South Africa for public institution is the Public Finance Management Act and the Municipal Finance Management Act. When you incur those levels of expenditure, you are not breaking the law of the Auditor General. You are breaking the law of the country that governs public financial management. When the audit office comes, it comes to check whether you've dealt with issues regularly or otherwise, and it imposes certain, not imposes, but it actually makes certain recommendations.
But Mr. Makwetu, with this kind of findings, one would beg the question, should you be at the State Capture Commission? Because these are very, very vital findings here.
To do what, the State Capture Commission?
And maybe have a say.
To audit what they are doing.
Some of the people who are taking the stand, you might actually have lots to actually share and have key insights.
But remember, if you look at the scope of an audit, it's also important, Arnold, to recognize the fact that an audit will deal with matters based on whatever deficiencies have been picked up in a particular sample. those deficiencies may be a component of what was happening in that environment not the entire population, okay? So it will be difficult for one to say, Mr. So-and-so, in respect of this particular transaction, did A, B, and C, because the scope of an audit is much more limited than what would an investigation do. So in that context, what we do in an audit, really, we flag the abuse that happens in an environment, which we also recommend for those that are charged with governance to take it to the next level to investigate. Let me give you an example. In the matter of, let's say, Bosasa, as far as the state capture is concerned,
yes.
Bosasa is a private entity. It doesn't get audited by us, but we audit the Department of Correctional Services. Now, in the books of the Department of Correctional Services, for the longest time, we have always highlighted instances of irregular expenditure, which means the people working in that department have been able to successfully facilitate the issuing of contracts, and it falls foul of the definition of irregular expenditure, gets reported, no action gets taken to fix it. Now, what's happening on the other side? It's not for the Auditor General to then track whether there are brown envelopes that are changing hands as a result of the irregular expenditure. So what our focus is that there must be some reason why somebody does not want to fix what gives rise to irregular expenditure. And I think that is already coming to light to us as we hear what has happened in the
Mr. Makwetu, burning question before I let you go. We're actually out of time. Mfuleni, the VAL, all these death threats, you flagged a few intimidation letters too coming through your office, or some even directed directly to you. What keeps you going? What wakes you up at night?
We've got a job to do in the public sector, and that job is to do our best to make sure that the monies that are appropriated for public services go where they are intended. And some people get uncomfortable when they get caught out doing the opposite. And I guess it comes with the territory of being an independent auditor. We're not investigators, we audit. And some people don't like our findings and they don't like what we recommend, and they probably try and take it physical. But we have been able to respond as an institution to how we've got to deal with those matters. So it doesn't sway us from carrying out our constitutional responsibility.